I guess what I'd love to do is explore a little bit about what each of you do. So Vanessa, you're you are one of the whale experts. What are the new things that we're learning about humpback whales in these waters?
Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us all here, and thank you, sorry for our late arrival. We had some very special guests we had to get through.
Of course.
Look, humpback whales are one of the coolest animals on Earth. They're really cool, but all whales are pretty cool. And I must say, we've got Professor Harcourt over there, so I don't know much about whales in comparison to him. He's my supervisor, or was.
Only once.
Yeah, well, we're very good colleagues now. So humpback whales, we see them, you will see them without even thinking about it, but humpback whales are very, very special animals. Not because I'm biased, but really they are a connection from the Antarctic to the tropics. And we're all talking about climate change right now, these animals can be used as tools to learn more about our blue backyard. So they're really important.
And Rob, what can humpback whales or what can whales tell us about climate change? How is climate change affecting them?
That's a great question. So we've been looking at how whales are changing where they're having to go, because with the oceans warming, the prey which they eat is primarily krill and copepods, so small crustacean, and those things live in a very dynamic environment. The oceans are warming, which means that warm water body masses are moving, and what we've been doing is been looking at where the whaling industry used to capture the whales back 200 years, and we can then trace back through where they were, and we're looking at where they are now. But we've been working on live animals without having to do any harm to them for about 30 years. And we're finding that particularly, not so much for humpback whales, but for right whales, which are the right whales because they were called the right whales by whalers because they were the right whales to kill, because they approach boats and they're friendly and they float, but also because they're the right animals to study, because they are truly magnificent. They are a great whale. They're about twice the size of humpback whales, up to 3 times the weight, 80 tonnes, some of the females to work on. Anyway, over the last 30 years, we've found changes that have occurred in where they're feeding. The animals that we get off New Zealand and Australia are going much further south, right down to the Antarctic edge. We're tracking them, and we're also using some quite clever chemical composition from tissues. And we're finding that in the South Atlantic, they're not doing that. They're staying in the mid-Southern Ocean. So there's quite dramatic changes in how the food that the whales need is changing in different parts of the world. It's exciting, but it's also kind of scary.
Thank you. Now, Alex, you've been studying whales recently, just south of Sydney. How do we study whales, and how has this changed over the last few years?
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Yes, I've actually just submitted my PhD a few days ago.
Congratulations!
Thank you. My research was focused on humpback whales in Jervis Bay. So particularly I was looking to see if it was a resting ground for mothers and calves, but I was also looking at novel methods for surveying whales. So traditionally we use land surveys, so when you'd have people at the cliff looking out, counting numbers, which is how we know that there's been such a great increase in whale numbers over the last couple of decades. And also boat surveys where we can count numbers but also collect images we use to identify the whales. So the underside of the whale's tail is like their fingerprint. So we can use these to determine how long whales are staying in an area, but also match these. Like I had some whales matched with, say, those in Hervey Bay. If you go and have a look at the stall behind us, you'll see those. But those methods are great, but in the recent years there's been a real uptake in other methods such as drones. So drones, we can fly drones above whale and get a great aerial perspective of behaviour. So if you've ever been on a whale watching vessel and you might see a splash of a tail or a fin, well, using these drones we can actually see behaviours like under the surface. So we see really cool interactions between mothers and their babies. We can see the babies feeding. It just provides a great new vantage point. So I think that's kind of where the methods are heading for whale research.
And I must point out, we love drones as well. Rob and I represent the Marine Predator Research Group at Macquarie Uni, and we honestly, the use of drones is amazing. In fact, you may be familiar with the whale snot drone collection off Sydney, that we were the first in the world, just off here in Bondi Beach, just off there, to collect whale snot with a flip lid petri dish, and the first in the world to collect whale viruses via this method. And then another first, we collected dolphin snot using the same tools. Which is, I know it's disgusting. Yeah, that look, I know it's gross, but it actually is lung bacteria. So whether it be collecting whale snot or looking at whale behaviour, the use of drones is becoming, as whale scientists, our tools in our toolbox to learn more about them. If you're really wanting to know, it's like collecting a PCR from a whale, okay? You want to get everyone's like, oh yeah. Everyone's had their nose swabbed, right? Yeah. There you go.
You need a really long swab.
Well,
or a drone.
Or a drone, that's right. So we can all use drones to do amazing things to whales without having to hurt them.
Yeah.
Vanessa, Alex was talking about sort of behaviour and Rob was talking about climate change. What behaviour changes have we noticed in whales due to climate change?
Ooh, okay, so this is using drones as well to identify changes, but also through non-scientists like citizen scientists. That's a person like you who can go out and collect information for us as scientists. So you don't have to have a PhD, so don't worry. You don't have to collect snot. So we've found through the use of drones, opportunistic people getting drone footage for us, as well as vessel usage, have seen whales feeding in super groups off areas down south of New South Wales. And when I say a super group, it's kind of like all of us right now, this room, all of us right now deciding to stop, feed, and stop migrating for the moment and just start feeding. On something healthy, rather. Not McDonald's, but a healthy stopover food, like that Oliver's now, that branch. And this may be indicating the whales and their presence, may be indicating over the last 2 years that there could potentially be changes going on environmentally, but also at the population might be indicating it to us that, hey, maybe these whales used to do this prior to the numbers being almost decimated, and now we're seeing large numbers recovering. Or maybe we're seeing whales from other populations come into this population, telling them how to sort of feed by using bubble nets, for example, which has never been observed in Australian waters since 2 years ago.
Yeah, until then. And to add to that, so we were at the site where the superpods were, so we found them a couple of years ago. But we were doing work on penguins where we were using techniques which are also very common, and you might have heard about it. It's called eDNA, where you just sample the water and then you look at probes from different water samples, and you can work out what the animals are feeding on. And while I was actually in the water collecting the water samples, one of these superpods surrounded us and started feeding around us. So we collected the water. We were looking at penguin diet, but we now know what the whales were feeding on too. So we've got actually molecular markers which allow us to know very, very exactly what they were feeding on. And this points to probably, for humpback whales, the most successful recovery of any conservation program that's occurred. So humpback whales are now delisted off the east coast of Australia, which means that they're no longer an endangered animal. When I was a boy, there was about 400 left off the east coast. There's now well over 35,000. Which is and it actually points to the fact that if we want to protect stuff, we can, but we have to make the effort to do it. So I think that they are probably the flagship of how conservation can actually work.
Rob, you've just published a paper about where right whales feed. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So that was actually what I was mentioning before. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the, along with the eDNA that I just mentioned, when we go and look at whale populations, we're really interested in whether or not they're all intermixing and breeding together, or if they're in separate, what they used to call fishery stocks. We just call a population structure. And so what we do is we take a little sample of skin using a modified, it's like a pop gun, a 22 rifle, but it just fires blanks. And it takes a little tiny bit of skin just off the top of the back of the whale. Vanessa's been out with me sampling with this. It's kind of fun, and we've been developing drones to do it, so we don't have to get close with boats as well, because we have to get pretty close to the whales. And with a 80-ton female, her tail is maybe 6 metres wide. If she gets upset, she can flip the boat. So it's kind of dangerous and it's scary for the whales. So we can collect this little bit of skin, and then from that we can work out not only if the male that we saw over the other side was the father of the calf that's there, but we can actually look at where they've been feeding about 6 months earlier. And so this means that's when they're down south in the Antarctic, where they're really hard to find. We do use satellites to look for whales now. There's some really cool work on satellite spotting whales. But the oceans are vast, and so what this does, it allows us to pinpoint where they're going to feed, because we can look at the carbon and the nitrogen, and we can look at what trophic level and which water mass they're in, and then we can look at how that's changing over time. Wow. So it's actually pretty cool.
Now, Alex, you mentioned both Jervis Bay. You've just been down studying whales, and Hervey Bay as well. Why are different habitats important at different times of the migration?
Yeah. Well, as Rob mentioned, feeding humpbacks. On the east coast, these whales feed in Antarctic nutrient-rich waters where they can, get fat pretty much. They then travel, about 5,000 kilometres north up to the Great Barrier Reef. And here, mothers or pregnant females give birth and they also breed in this area. So the warm, sheltered waters of the Great Barrier Reef means that calves can kind of feed from their mother. So they're whales and mammals. Calves feed on milk like we do. They, feed from their mothers directly. So that gives them an environment where calves can build up their energy for when they travel back south. But as they're travelling south, there are also these coastal embayments used. So Hervey Bay is one of them, and my research was in Jervis Bay. And these areas provide, calm, sheltered waters away from rough offshore conditions and also predators that really gives the mothers a chance to rest and also the calves to feed. So most of the time, adults, apart from, as Vanessa mentioned, the cool super pods we saw a couple of years ago, there was one actually just off Jervis Bay. But most of the time, adults aren't feeding. So these kind of calm waters are really important for these animals, particularly to ensure calves can grow to a size that they can travel back to Antarctic feeding waters safely.
So are most of the whales entering Jervis Bay, they're females with calves?
Yeah, so I had 3 years of field work. So we found that we recorded about 350 whale groups within that time, and about 80% of the whales entering the bay have a calf with them, just highlighting it as a really important area for those groups.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Sorry, I'm just...
Yeah.
Now, Vanessa, Rob mentioned a moment ago about whales being delisted from the threatened species list. That sounds like a good thing. Is that a good thing?
Well, I'm sure people are going, oh no, we've delisted them. That's it. We're done. We're finished. We don't care about the humpback whale, but we do. It just means that we can focus our conservation priorities, and I've focused a lot on this in my PhD, looking at where we should put our conservation dollar. So that doesn't mean that whales, like the humpback whale, are not protected in Australian waters. They do remain protected, but we can focus our efforts on threatened species, which a humpback whale in the East Coast, at least, and the West as well, are not listed as a threatened species. So they're not likely to go extinct overnight. So we can focus our conservation dollar towards another animal like the southern right whale, like Rob's working on, which unfortunately hasn't rebounded as well as the humpback whale post-whaling. So it's really important to keep that in mind.
Gotcha. So building on that, Rob, what does the future hold for whales? I guess the good and the bad. What have we learned?
That's a great question, Robin. So if we don't kill them, they do a lot better. But the problem is, and there's a very good book you should all read. It's called We Are All Whalers by a friend of ours, Michael Moore. And he points out that actually, because we take a lot of food out of the ocean and because we put a lot of rubbish into the ocean, and you've all seen all the plastics things here, we're actually causing a lot of other issues for us, which are going to become worse as they get under pressure as the oceans warm as well. And so shipping, so Vanessa and I wrote a really quite a lovely paper on looking at not only how shipping lanes are analogous to roads. So whales crossing shipping lanes is the same as wallabies crossing the road. A lot of ships kill whales and also whale sharks and other giants of the sea. So shipping is a huge problem, and shipping is increasing dramatically, particularly post-COVID. And with warming, there are also new routes opening up. So over the Arctic, it's much, much quicker to go from Asia to Europe and to North America. Over the Arctic, it saves them about 40% of the fuel that they use. So that's billions of dollars, which means that there's a huge pressure up there in areas which had never been open before. So all of the bowhead whales and the other Arctic whales are in threat up there. And the other thing is fishing. So we work on the North Atlantic right whale, which, unlike the southern hemisphere animals, is critically endangered. There's only 360 animals left, males, females and calves, and they get hit a lot by ships and they get entangled in lobster pots. And because there's 3 million lobster pots and a lot of people dependent upon that income, it's very difficult to say, well, you've got to take the pots out of the water because there's not very many whales. Most people never catch a whale, but every whale that dies is a huge impact on the population. And so we've got these coming threats, and we really need to guard against those. And there are things we can do. We can make sure we stick to sustainable seafood. That's probably the first thing. Look at going local, but also lobby your MPs. I mean, parliamentarians have paid a lot of money to do things for us. Well, if we tell them we want to save the world, then they should do it.
Alex, we've just heard from Rob about things like shipping lanes and lobster pots. I guess with so many humpback whales being seen closer to the coast, what are some of the other potential causes of disturbance, so other ways they're getting disturbed?
Yeah. In addition to things like shipping, as Rob said, it's more of an issue in the Northern Hemisphere. But kind of closer to home, we have activities that have been recently introduced that may have potential disturbances to whales. So these are activities like, say, swim with the whale activities. They're being introduced on a few sites around the coast. While we kind of are still working out the effects, it's just something to consider. So, for example, like you're not allowed to get into the water with a calf in Australian waters, but it's not always that easy to see if it is a calf, So in these, as I said, these near-shore embayments where calves and mothers like to rest, if we're getting into the water with them, that can be quite invasive on their space. That can, have longer-term implications. Similar, I guess, with also commercial whale watching, although they keep their distance a little bit more and they're obviously not in the water with these animals. Those are also activities that may show disturbances, not in the same way, of course, that shipping with, death of whales, but these are other activities in our waters.
Can I just follow up from that? So I was at a meeting last week with the federal government about right whales around Australia. So right whales have two populations. There's the ones that breed off South Australia and Western Australia, and they've been recovering about half the rate of the humpback whale, but that's appropriate because they're a giant. They really are a giant whale. Humpbacks are actually only a medium-sized whale. But on the east coast, we have a separate population. They're genetically distinct. We showed that about 20 years ago. And the population on this side of the country is not recovering anywhere near as well. And the New South Wales National Parks have been doing a lot of work over the last few years looking at residency time. So just like Alex was talking about for right whales, and we've been working over on the west coast as well as the east coast. And what we see is that the animals might stay in a bay off Albany or Esperance in WA for 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks at a time. The animals on the east coast here never stay in a place more than a couple of weeks, and often actually only a couple of days. And nearly always, the reason they move is that they get disturbed by people going out to see them in a boat, or even surfers going out. So you all saw, it was on the news, the mother right whale and calf at Manly, when all the surfers surrounded her and she just swept her tail out to say, "Go away, please. I'll be polite."
Politely.
But, and so particularly with critically endangered animals, we have to be a lot more aware that you shouldn't go closer. I mean, the regulations are 100 metres, but 300 metres would be the appropriate thing for a mother and calf. You're meant to be 300 if they've got a calf, but people, as Alex said, they can't tell what a calf is because a calf is actually defined in a way that is almost impossible to measure unless you're using a drone.
It's good to know there are polite whales as well. Now, we need to be wrapping up in a minute or two, but what I'd love from each of you would be, essentially a call to action. This is one of the, the biggest crowds we've had today in these Science in Your Swimmers sessions. So what should we be doing? How can we help support, preserve these big friendly giants of the sea? Vanessa, I'll start with you.
Well, first of all, I would say that all of you now have a new wealth of knowledge, and I would say a simple call to action would be to share this knowledge that you've learnt right here in this 15-minute session. I'm not plugging it, but actually I'm plugging it. I've written a children's book called The Voyage of Whale and Calf, and it talks about the annual migration each year. And it's actually a notable right now. I'm very excited. And so it is really important to communicate what whales we're likely to see and why they're important to see them for the future, and how we should all be kind to our environment, such as not throwing out rubbish or using a plastic bag. Keep that Bondi Beach nice and clean for our whales that come up our East Coast each and every year.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear the title of the book. What was it?
Oh, I love that. The Voyage of Whale and Calf. I didn't pay him for that. Thank you.
Well done, Rob.
Alex, a call to action for everybody here.
As Vanessa said, I think, big issue with plastic at the moment. Back to what my last point with activities that, we probably have all been involved in at some point or another, is just being a bit mindful. Also, I think you can hold companies accountable a little bit. Just make sure they're following regulations, keeping their distance. If you're a recreational boater, keeping your distance, making sure you understand the permits of the area and the legislation, and just really minimising disturbance as much as possible.
Thank you. I think holding companies accountable is a really important one. And Rob?
Yep, and I'll follow up with that. So everybody in this room who has a job has got superannuation being paid in. So contact your super fund and make sure that you move all of your investments into environmentally friendly and ethical investments, because the dollar actually does speak. And you know, we've had an election of a Teal member for this local area. We've got a sympathetic parliament. It's not perfect, but we really need to push hard to get changes made at a national level. And you can do that with your own money through your superannuation. So if you're looking at investing, or if you've got any control of your superannuation fund, try and ask them to move it to ethical investments. The returns have actually been a lot better over the last few years anyway, but you know, money speaks. And talk to your local MPs as much as possible, because particularly here, I mean, Allegra's great, and she will, but you know, the more people contact them and say, we want this, the more that they're going to push it in Parliament, and that's what we want.
Don't fund the problem, support the solution.
Exactly.
Yep. Good. Would you please join me in thanking our amazing panel, Vanessa, Alex and Rob?
Well done, Alex.
Thank you all. Thank you. And thank you, Robin.